ever since then, I've wanted to be an astronaut, and I am an astronaut.
It's a getaway. It's a getaway for everyone, and I think that's the appeal in space.
I still am aware that there's very few women in the industry.
I didn't even really know my job existed when I was in school. It wasn't until I got, I understood I wanted to do space, but I didn't know space engineering was a thing.
It's the next unknown. There's so much that we don't know about space.
I'm one of the first black female in the country. I had a responsibility to make sure that it doesn't end with me.
I'd like to be part of the global team of people who are working on solving the mysteries of the universe.
So space is really kind of trying to understand, how stars form, how galaxies evolve, the bits between the stars that look invisible to us, but actually are full of stuff. We just can't see it because it emits light at very different wavelengths. So we have to use different telescopes to kind of probe those environments. So it's really like, everything that's outside of the little heliosphere that's kind of surrounding us and our planetary system.
Well, for me, space is everything that's not right here, so everything out there. It's a getaway for everyone, and I think that's the appeal in space. I think that's the big appeal that draws younger generations into it, because wherever you are, it's enough to look up at the starry sky and see that your problems are small and see how vast the universe is.
I think it's things like better infrastructure on the ground, sort of a lot of autonomous vehicles. I think there's going to be a real drive for autonomy based on the basis of things like climate change. I think it's kind of like a weird thing to link together, but certainly there's sort of new methods in farming and things like that will be completely dependent on sort of space infrastructure. So much of what we do on the ground is dependent on space.
My definition is kind of everything off the Earth, everything outside of the Earth. So that could be satellites going around the Earth, that could be the moon, it could be other planets, it could be our star, it could be the galaxy, it could be the universe. So kind of everything from near to far is included in space, in my opinion.
I feel very ecstatic because I've wanted to be an astronaut for a very long time, and I finally achieved this. But I also feel a huge sense of commitment and responsibility towards my country, towards the Arab world, because I will be representing them in the global industry of space. I have to do my best. That I have to work more than 100%. That I have to prove that I deserve to be in this position. I think it's only the fact that no one was actually interested in the space field before. That's the only reason why we don't have as many Arab astronauts. In particular, not specifically female Arab astronauts, but Arab astronauts in general. To anyone who thinks that, I don't know, maybe I reached this point due to maybe knowing someone or someone knowing me. I want to break any type of thought people might have that I don't deserve to be where I am, or that Arab women in general won't be able to fill in this position. I want to break that sort of stereotype. In general, I hope to gain new skills and in-depth knowledge about space. I'd like to be part of the global team of people who are working on solving the mysteries of the universe.
I'm one of the first black female in the country, and for me that's not important. And for me, what was important is who is the second, who's the third, who's the fourth, who's the 100th person. Then we start talking. As much as I was celebrated, I had a responsibility to make sure that it doesn't end with me. It goes on. We get to the 10th. And I think for me, that's worth celebrating. I look at some of the young girls that have gone through our programs. When they send me SMSs, they send me WhatsApps. You know, I'm an aeronautical engineer, I'm a mechanical engineer. And then I knew that, you know, I've done my job.
I was 4 years old when we first walked on the moon, and I remember my parents taking me and my older sister out in the backyard and pointing to the moon and saying, we've got people there. And ever since then, I've wanted to be an astronaut, and I am an astronaut. And now just having that amazing rocket out on the launch pad, it is just, so I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. Just, it's amazing. It's hard to describe.
I mean, when we think about Apollo, we've landed men on the moon, but we haven't landed a woman there yet. And it didn't dawn on me probably until I was in college that we hadn't done that. And I've always been interested in space. I've always been somebody who wanted to work in the space industry, and, you know, actually being a part of the mission that will put the first woman on the moon. That's just so exciting. And, you know, when we look at the spacecraft, we're seeing history. This is something that's going to be taught in history books someday. And I don't know if the folks that worked Apollo ever stepped back to think about the history they were making, but I try to take that and just step back and just see this is an incredible impact that the spacecraft will have on the world and children all across the world.
I feel like I started in the space sector thinking exactly the same thing. So thinking that being in space means I'm going to be an astronaut, or maybe I'll just design rockets. But then as soon as I joined the sector, I started realizing that there's way more than that. And contributing to the space sector would also mean, even if it's just as little as making drawings that are space themed, or just doing outreach activities and like letting kids in schools know about what space is about. That is also another way of being involved with it. Making art that's genuinely like space-based, that's a way of being involved as well. It really depends. Or just helping businesses developing in the sector as well. That's another way of being involved with it. So when I was like a teenager, I started thinking, do you know what? I really like sci-fi and I was reading a lot of books about, you know, potential developments of technology and so on, and I was so fascinated, and I was thinking, well, my brain does understand these things, so where is the limit? Like, I can be part of this. Like, now I'm growing up and I can do whatever I want, and I want to do this. I want to be part of this big thing that's exploding now, you know. So I guess that's how I started getting into space. I grew up thinking, well, I'm not any different, and like I don't really understand why there would be less women interested in you know, more scientific subjects. I also feel like maybe a lot of people just don't understand that if you're involved with STEM subjects, not necessarily you're just doing, you know, maths and physics, but there are a lot of different ways that you can be involved with them.
I think most people you speak to wouldn't even know that their job existed when they're in school or even university. So I think it's important to educate on those different types of roles. So then it doesn't limit you, because people might think, oh well, I can't do that, so therefore I probably don't belong in STEM, when that's not necessarily the case.
I think it's important to see representations of all sorts of different people, not only women or not only people like myself, or it is important to realize that anyone can do anything.
I think it's helpful, particularly when you are talking about younger students, pupils at school, when they're trying to decide what sectors they want to go into and what areas of interest there are. It's helpful if there's a role model. If you're looking at an area and you don't see anybody who looks like you as when you're in primary school, it's really difficult to imagine yourself in that role, even if you're interested in that role. So I do think representation is really important.
I didn't have any like role models or exposure to the space industry when I was growing up, and I think like, while there were those sort of genius stereotypes, I don't think I really connected with them at all. So I don't think I really gave them much thought, especially not at a younger age. I think when I got a bit older and I started trying to read into it, I didn't really notice that it was all like one type of person that was sort of, you know, leading the field, because for me I was just kind of like interested in the science. But I will say that I definitely I had a lot of like, I guess I did have a lot of male role models when I was growing up, but it was only because I was like, of the sports and the music and the science I was interested in was just all men. It was almost as if there were no sort of female role models to even lean towards. It was just like, wasn't there.
In Italy, where I grew up, there wasn't a culture allowing girls' education in STEM subjects. And I think also there was a lack of models or role models. So everyone around me actually was, as a woman, was a housewife or was a teacher, because a teacher was working very well with work-life balance, because essentially you get annual leave at the same time as your children.
I work at the University of Leeds as a university lecturer, and I work at the School of Physics and Astronomy. My specialist area is astrophysics. I'm also a researcher, so my role entails a balance between carrying out independent astronomical research using today's foremost facilities, but at the same time teaching at the university and teach undergraduate and postgraduate students. Focus of the research project that I'm leading at the moment is on the formation of giant planets. So these planets, such as Jupiter or Saturn, are present in our solar system but are not very often found in other planetary systems. So in a way, that's what makes our solar system unique, and we need to understand how they form. So for many years, research has focused on the formation of rocky planets and understanding how planets like our Earth formed and became inhabitable. But to understand the history of a planetary system and what makes it habitable, makes some of the planets habitable, it's important also to understand the big guys, where they come from and how they end up where they are. The nature of research in astronomy is that you always work with other people, yes. And that often involves working with people across the world. Yeah. It's a very global field of research. In that sense, so my collaborators range from US to China and Japan. It involves a lot of hard work. First, obviously, get a degree in my case, I got a degree in astronomy specifically, but you can get a degree in physics or astronomy with astrophysics. Well, I always had an interest in astronomy and like to go out and look at the night sky, but as I think most children would, if they have the privilege of living in an area where you can actually see the stars. But I think the only time when I actually realized that I wanted to study astronomy was when I realized that such a thing was possible. So I grew up in Bosnia, and it wasn't, or ex-Yugoslavia as I call it, it was not a common thing to think of astronomy as a career.
So I work in the astrophysics group at the University of Leeds, and my research area would be in what we call astrochemistry, which is an interdisciplinary research area that merges astrophysics, astronomy with chemistry. And what we do is we look at chemistry in space. So you might think that space is really empty and nothing much happens anywhere, but actually there's a huge amount of chemistry that happens that leads into things like star and planet formation. So that research area is really trying to understand those processes that happen in space. We use a combination of observations, so big telescopes that we apply for time on, get some observations, and we also do a lot of computational modeling to help us interpret what we see as well. So we're really interested to try to understand if our Earth formed in quite peculiar, unique conditions, or whether the same processes that shaped the habitability of our planet actually can happen around other stars. So kind of trying to place us as a planet kind of in the wider context of planet formation. And it's an interdisciplinary project. So I'm the astrochemist on the project. So I'm the one that understands chemistry in space and how we use observations to measure the composition of planet forming regions around new stars. And then Felix, who's a postdoc that works with me, he's the planet expert. So he models planetary atmospheres and their dynamics and composition. And then Anissa, who works with me, she's the computational chemist. So she's running very complex, micro-scale models of chemistry that happens on the quantum scale. And the idea is try to bring all these different scales together to understand how habitable planets form.
So Space Hub Yorkshire is Yorkshire's regional space cluster. So we are kind of coordinators, promoters of the space industry in Yorkshire, kind of want to bring prosperity to the region. And my role within that is kind of twofold. One is to interpret kind of space technology and kind of be responsible for the technical aspect. And the other side is I work on a project called Green Space, which is looking to introduce Earth observation technology, so satellite data, into agriculture and into green finance, just increase the uptake of satellite data in those industries. Yeah, so my journey was kind of a little bit varied. So I started out in physics with astrophysics. That was kind of the degree I did at university. From there, I did a PhD in astrophysics, looking at the evolution of small stars. So kind of stars like our sun are fairly small in comparison to others that are around in the galaxy. And so I was looking at the end stages of their lives, looking at what they were made of and how they evolve. And so from there, I did a bit of a mini jump and I moved into planetary sciences. And so I did a postdoctoral role for about 5 years, and I was looking at the atmosphere of different planetary bodies, and by planetary bodies I mean planets, moons, this kind of thing within our solar system, so not just restricted to planets. And whilst I was in that role, I was also a member of the NASA Curiosity mission, and I was responsible for planning observations and using the data that was coming back to learn more about the atmosphere of Mars.
I've been in the space industry for about 5 years now. So I actually started as a physicist. So I have a master's degree in physics with astronomy. And during my time in university, I was thinking to myself, do I want to go into pure physics and do a PhD? Do I want to go into finance? But I kind of felt I always wanted to stay in space. And engineering felt a really good way to get a hands-on grip of what space is like. So I ended up going into Lockheed Martin UK and working in their graduate scheme, which gave me a chance to try loads of different roles over kind of 2 years or so. So I got to try being a systems engineer and operational analysis. I got to work with business development. And ultimately I came out as a systems engineer working in their defensive space programs. More recently, I joined the UK Space Agency in their Office of the Chief Engineer, which is their technical team. I didn't even really know my job existed when I was in school. It wasn't until I understood I wanted to do space, but I didn't know space engineering was a thing. I didn't really know what the options were in space. I certainly didn't know that I could be a space project manager, for example, or anything like that. I was really lucky when I was growing up that I won a competition with the Metro newspaper when I was about 11, and I got to go to Space Camp Turkey, which was an awesome experience. I got to try astronaut simulators, learn stuff about what we know about the moon and different planets and stars. And I think from then that kind of ignited the passion in space. But really, I think the more we can open up kids to understand that space is something that so many different people can do, and the more jobs they know exist in the space industry, the more people we can get in the space industry.
I was always very interested in science and maths. Those were my strong subjects, but astronomy space was not on my radar at all. I wasn't part of an astronomy club, or we just didn't have that. It was the 1980s in Northern Ireland, there wasn't astronomy clubs.
So I'm slightly unusual in that it was very, very early. So I was very young when I discovered that I really liked science and I thought the stars were great. I loved learning about the planets. So this is kind of early primary school is when I had decided this is what I like these. And when we did the solar system in year 4, I'd already learned a lot of that myself.
I was never a child that wanted to be an astrophysicist. I had no concept that that was a thing. I mean, I was the only girl in my physics class at A level. So there was always that gender disparity. And again, this is going back 1990s. So I don't think things have changed very much, to be honest, when I talk to young women now, unfortunately.
It's only a small number of space clusters in the UK. We're talking kind of in circa 15. And of the ones I interact with, there are women in the field. So there is, I don't know the statistics. In the wider kind of tech side of things, there's definitely less representation from women than there are men. That is something that I have noticed.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's, you know, a lot of people I think feel they have to put on a certain persona to be a woman in the industry. And I think you feel like you have to be loud or strong or kind of make your voice heard. And I think that, you know, on both sides of the spectrum, our male colleagues and our more senior female colleagues can just open the door for people to be more themselves and not have to act a certain way or feel they have to act a certain way to be heard. Yeah, I've got to say, particularly as an engineer, space feels quite a male-dominated environment. And I think that, you know, if you look at the portion of people that I see in meetings even, right, it certainly has got a bit better in my current team, but throughout time, often I was the only woman in the room, and I was certainly the only woman engineer in the room for a lot of my projects, and a lot of my programs, a lot of my meetings.
What we are seeing in recent years, at least looking at, you know, number of applicants and people interested, there's quite a good balance between women and men in terms of their interest in studying in higher education. At least when we look at applicants here in Leeds in recent years, really what happens is that somewhere along the line, and typically after the PhD, that this balance drops significantly. So it's somewhere in the early research career that the balance gets shifted in favor of men.
I think there's definitely the kind of like male genius stereotype, and I studied physics, and everyone just worships Richard Feynman. And it's still, even though, you know, we're like, I don't know, 70 years on now.
I think it's really hard to balance opening the doors and keeping the opportunities open, but not necessarily making people feel like they're being pushed out to make space for women. So I think we've got to really balance the way we kind of encourage women to get into it and show that there is space for them by having role models and having career aspiration talks and showing them that it is a path that's open to them, with the not wanting to gender discriminate and the not wanting to pick someone for the job or have them feel they've been picked for the job just because they are a woman.
Young generations of astrophysicists or physicists who will not necessarily all go, in fact, a minority of them go into research. A lot of them go into different businesses, and generally it helps to inject a lot of this young power in the STEM subjects, especially because that's what the current society really needs.
It's quite a creative place to work, and because it's kind of working in innovation, it definitely feels like there's not many barriers, and I think that's quite nice, and I'm actually really enjoying it here at the moment.
I'm currently working in quite a niche area, so there's a lot of options out there that I'm excited to explore.
I think it's definitely the kind of, the coming up with ideas and you know, seeing what little bits of work you as an individual can do towards these like groundbreaking, huge projects that are going to be enormous and really important in the future.
It's the next unknown. There's so much that we don't know about space. There's so much out there that we are yet to understand. And there's so much kind of weird and wonderful things out there. So if you like volcanoes, as an example, if you think they're an interesting an interesting phenomenon. There is a moon in our solar system that is the most volcanic place in the solar system, and it is incredible. And if you think that dust storms are interesting, Mars, the kind of one of our closest planets, it has dust storms that get so large they wrap around the entire planet. So, you know, anything that you see on Earth that you think, oh, this is interesting beyond life, then you'll find something similar or more extreme outside of the planet. So I think that's really important. It's, of course, also asking the question, you know, are we alone? That's the perpetual question. But on a more practical note, space has a lot of practical applications to our lives here on Earth. Anytime you hold a mobile phone, your phone is communicating with satellites. So if you are using GPS, for example, on your mobile phone, you're mapping your way from one place to another. That's communicating with satellites. So satellite communications is a really important thing. We can use satellite data to better understand the planet, better understand climate change, mitigate the effects of climate change, and it can be used in a whole host of different industries.
I think it's, I think for me, it's actually finally being somewhere where you can be technical and creative, because that's something that just is very, very rare, I think, in typical engineering industries. And it's nice that space has this sort of, it's so far out that you can be a little bit out there yourself. And it's a really nice combination of like creativity and engineering.
It all just comes down to origins. And I think, why are we here? How did we get here? What are the processes that led to us being here on this planet right now? How common are those processes? Which all feeds into how common is life in the universe. And it's some people might think it's a very philosophical question, but it's a highly scientific question as well. Because, you know, I think it's a really important thing for humans to try to understand where we come from and how common it is or isn't for life to have arisen on a planet, because it puts who we are and how we live and under a microscope, really. You know, what are we doing? Are we making the world a better place? You know, is this the only version of us that could ever exist? Should we protect it? You know, so by understanding where we come from, how we got here, by looking outside of ourselves and trying to see evidence of these processes that lead to habitable planets elsewhere, help put us under a bit of a microscope and challenge kind of what we're doing to the planet.
If you've got the passion for space, there is room for you, right? There is room in the space industry. There are so many jobs that we need to fill. There's so much opportunity to grow. There's so many new companies. There's so many established companies. There really is space for whatever you want to do in space. And so I think what I'd say is, it can be tough at times, same as any industry, and it can be tough to be an engineer. It's quite a hard job, it's quite a demanding job at times, but it never gets boring. You're always learning something new. Space is something where we're constantly pushing what we can do, we're constantly innovating. And so if you've got a passion to actually make a difference and have a say and change the way we're going forward with a lot of these projects and huge programs, then space is a great place to work.
I think the words of encouragement would be explore all your interests, find what you love and pursue.